The mineral deal is not enough on its own, but can I just remind him, Russia is the aggressor. Zelensky is a war leader whose country has been invaded. And we should all be supporting him and not fawning over Putin.
Thank you. It may be a great irony that a Remainer Prime Minister used Brexit freedoms as effectively as he did yesterday. Indeed, as Number 10 briefed, we are now in a unique position compared to the rest of Europe, and yesterday was a triumph. I also applaud him making such positive words about President Trump and our relationship with America, even if nobody behind him agrees. But here's the key. President Zelensky has now accepted that he's going to sign the minerals agreement with America. And America's going to put in $100 billion or whatever it is, and thousands of Americans will be in Ukraine. Is that of itself enough of a security guarantee? No. Or does it mean that we need to send British troops? And if we do, given the size of our army, how many?
The mineral deal is not enough on its own, but can I just remind him, Russia is the aggressor. Zelensky is a war leader whose country has been invaded. And we should all be supporting him and not fawning over Putin.
Keir Starmer's failure to directly answer Nigel Farage's question in the House of Commons is yet another example of his vague and evasive political style. Instead of addressing whether the U.S. minerals deal with Ukraine is a sufficient security guarantee, Starmer deflected with a predictable response about Russia being the aggressor and the need to support Zelensky. While few would dispute that Russia is the instigator of the war, this does nothing to clarify the UK's actual stance or commitments. The real issue at hand is not just moral support for Ukraine, but the specifics of Britain's military and strategic involvement, an issue Starmer repeatedly sidesteps. His refusal to answer the question about how many troops the UK is willing to send is particularly troubling. If he is indeed planning to send British forces to Ukraine, why not be transparent about it? If he isn't, then why not say so clearly? Instead, he hides behind empty rhetoric about leading from the front, which raises even more concerns. What does leading from the front actually mean? Is the UK going to escalate its military presence in Ukraine? Will British soldiers be deployed on the ground, or will the country limit itself to supplying weapons and training? These are the kinds of crucial questions the public deserves answers to, yet Starmer avoids them, opting instead for grandstanding statements that lack substance. This evasiveness is not just a problem for political optics. It is a dangerous approach to leadership. If the UK is heading towards deeper military involvement in Ukraine, the British public has a right to know. War is not a decision to be made in vague, indirect terms. It requires clear objectives, honest communication, and a well-defined strategy. By refusing to articulate his position, Starmer is either concealing the true extent of his government's plans, or he simply has no coherent strategy at all, both of which are deeply concerning. Furthermore, his rhetoric about not fawning over Putin is a deliberate attempt to dismiss legitimate concerns about the extent of Britain's involvement in the conflict. Questioning whether the U.S. minerals deal is a sufficient security guarantee is not the same as sympathizing with Putin. Yet Starmer, like many establishment politicians, uses such accusations to silence any scrutiny of the Western approach to the war. This is a classic tactic. Frame anyone who questions interventionist policies as being weak on Russia, rather than actually engaging with the complexities of the issue. The public is increasingly waking up to who the real warmongers are. Starmer, who once positioned himself as a moderate and a pragmatist, now appears fully aligned with the most hawkish elements of the political establishment. His refusal to answer direct questions, coupled with his vague promises of leading from the front, signals that he is more than willing to drag Britain further into foreign conflicts without properly informing the public. If he truly believes deeper military involvement in Ukraine is necessary, he should have the courage to say so outright. Rather than hiding behind empty slogans and moral posturing, Britain deserves transparency and leadership, not more political evasion and warmongering disguised as diplomacy.
Sir Bernard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I just point out that President J.D. Vance seems to be in favour of free speech, but not free nations? Yeah. And isn't don't we also have to point out what others are saying is there is no history of Vladimir Putin proving a trustworthy treaty maker, and that there can be no security, there is no path to a peace in Ukraine that is secure without the engagement of the Americans, the failure of their support risking a wider war in Europe that would inevitably draw them in. Can we quietly and diplomatically keep making those points to the White House so that we have a chance of peace in our continent?
Well, he's quite right. The history is that Putin is untrustworthy. That is why the Ukrainians are so concerned that there should be a security guarantee in relation to any deal. They've been here before. They've seen the credibility of his word. They know he's untrustworthy. That is why they're so concerned. We share their concern. We're working with them. He's quite right that we need the US to be working alongside us and with us in the way we have done for decades to ensure the security and defence of Europe. And I will continue to ensure I can do everything I can to ensure that that arrangement that has proved so successful, the alliance that is NATO, the most successful, important alliance we've ever had, continues and goes from strength to strength.
The remark that J.D. Vance seems to be in favour of free speech, but not free nations, heard during the British House of Commons discussion on the Russia-Ukraine war, is a pointed criticism of the Ohio senator's stance on the conflict. It suggests that while Vance vocally supports the principles of free expression in the United States, he does not extend that same commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty and self-determination. This statement reflects the broader tension between isolationist and interventionist approaches to foreign policy, particularly in the West's response to Russia's aggression. Keir Starmer's comment in response: "The history is that Putin is untrustworthy. That is why Ukrainians are so concerned there should be a security guarantee," reinforces the view that Russia's past actions leave no room for ambiguity. Starmer's argument rests on the premise that Western support for Ukraine is not just about defending one country, but about preventing a broader pattern of Russian aggression that could destabilize Europe further. This logic aligns with the traditional Western security doctrine. That aggression must be met with a firm response to prevent future escalations. However, Starmer's assertion lacks depth in addressing the real challenges surrounding a security guarantee for Ukraine. The question remains, what form should this guarantee take? NATO membership for Ukraine is unlikely in the short term due to the risk of direct war with Russia, and other alternatives such as security pacts with individual Western nations have their own limitations. While Starmer correctly identifies Putin as untrustworthy, he does not offer any concrete solutions beyond reaffirming the need for Western support. Ultimately, the accusation against J.D. Vance, that he supports free speech but not free nations, reflects a broader Western frustration with isolationist tendencies, particularly among American conservatives. However, this criticism oversimplifies the issue. The debate over Ukraine is not just about ideological purity, but about practical strategy. How to ensure Ukraine's security without provoking direct conflict between nuclear powers. While Starmer's remarks emphasize the moral necessity of standing against Putin, they do little to address the real complexities of crafting a lasting security framework for Ukraine. In the end, both interventionists and isolationists must grapple with the same reality: how to balance principles of freedom and sovereignty with the pragmatic constraints of global politics.